Good morning. Good morning. It is a wonderful day. I am not sick, even if I sound like it. My voice is a little raspy and gone. It fades in and out a little bit. But that was from being at a wrestling match for my son's high school that was taking place tournament all day and cheering for my son and the team. Uh, yeah, a little rough. So I'll sound a little rough. But we're going to do the best that we can do to get through here. I don't have the clicker. We are in John chapter 9. We left off, just a short little recap. I'll back up a couple slides. We're at an individual in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 12, that was blind from birth. And he was healed of his blindness by Jesus the Christ, spitting on the ground, in this verse 6, and making clay and putting it in the man's eyes, and then telling him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. And he did. He came back and he could see. And so the Pharisees interrogate the man healed by Jesus, and they're trying to tell the man that he needs to basically denounce Jesus for healing him on the Sabbath and attribute it to any other means. You know, maybe he wasn't the man. Maybe he wasn't the man that we've all known who's been blind from birth. That may be one. And they're like, well, no, he is. And then, well, maybe he wasn't really blind, or maybe the thing that was put in his eyes, maybe the medicine. Maybe it was medicine. Maybe you could say, you know what, there was a magic elixir that was made, had nothing to do with the man. Anybody could have done that. You know, it was the washing of the water of the pool. So I just had something in my eye. I didn't know it from birth, right? I washed it out. So any of these type of things that they're trying to give him multiple outs to attribute the miracle to anything but Jesus. So this brings us to verses 18 through 23, and they bring the parents into it. So let's go ahead and read it. Verse 18. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received the sight. And they asked him, saying, is this your son, whom you say was born blind? How then does he now see? Maybe it's not the same person, right? His parents answered and said to them, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he, talking about Jesus, was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So what does this mean, where he says he is of age? And why did they ask the parents?
They asked the parents because they wanted to prove this wasn't their son.
But why? Why for this man ask the parents? We had other people healed. Other people had miracles happen, and they didn't go get their parents.
Because he was a child.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why. He was a child. And he is of age. I assume it's still it's the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah thing still.
Yeah.
At a certain age, you're considered an adult, even though you're not really.
Yeah.
In the Jewish
Age 12.
culture. Yeah. So he is of age, therefore he's responsible for himself. The child therefore falls into their purview of care. But, and as Mike said, it was to say, okay, is this really your kid? Was he really blind from birth? Why? Can he see now? That kind of thing.
these individuals who've been taking care of a blind son, I'm sure it was costly, and they might be impoverished, and it says they really rely upon the synagogue. Now, granted, if you're a Jewish person, you sell wares, merchandise, and things, your primary audience is probably going to be Jews. You know, little tight circles. And we can think about that even today in our modern structure. We have historically black neighborhoods, that have a black economy. And you even buy black, black owned business and all these other, and you also have Jewish today. You have, Asian districts. You have historical German neighborhoods or Italian neighborhoods. In big cities, like New York, you have boroughs. And this is where these people were. And they bought from each other, they sold to each other, they tried to keep their money internal, right? And it'd be the same type of thing here, right? So there was a lot of racism that prevailed then and even today. Be like, hey, these group of people, they make the very best stuff. And I even hear this today about things like the Amish, right? Now, granted, you might earn a reputation, and that reputation might be good, but when you say everything that's made by every Amish person is superior, that's not true, right? But it pervades. And so these people don't want to be kicked out of the synagogue, number one, because they lose a lot of clientele if they did have a business. But number two, if they rely upon charity, they would be completely cut off.
It was intimidation.
Yeah.
It was a shakedown.
Yeah.
They're like, because they knew that, and it's the same like you said in today's society is, and it is really still about money. But if they had said yes, that's our son, yes, he was blind, yes, we know the man who healed him, then they lost everything. But if they plot, which is crazy, they plotted off on their 12-year-old child, then they've only just lost their child. They've not lost their standing in society. They've not lost their income. They've not lost any of that.
Kind of like what they did with Jesus.
Yes, exactly.
And they even said, right, towards the end, they're like, yeah, we know that this man is doing these miracles. He's the Christ. But this isn't the Christ we're looking for.
Yeah.
Look, if we let this guy become king, he's saying love your enemies. And if we let this type of guy take over the throne, Rome's going to destroy us. We're not going to have a kingdom. We can't let this guy take the throne. In order to save what we have, to keep the status quo, we have to kill him.
Yeah.
It's better for one man to die than the nation.
And they're willing to sacrifice their son.
Yeah.
For their whatever it is they have. I can't even fathom.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
Keep in mind, they feared being thrown out of the synagogue. The Jewish belief was more than a religion, it was also an economic system.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The things we're talking about. If they were impoverished, it makes sense for them as soon as he's no longer their responsibility. Mm-hmm. Take him and set him at the gate.
Oh, it's like that in today's society.
Yeah.
It's not, and it's not just in the Jewish culture.
Yeah. I'm going to pawn this off. This is not my responsibility anymore. Someone else take care of it. And now I don't have to be burdened to take care of it. So this young man, probably at age 12, who has never seen in his entire life, he's probably not been educated. They probably didn't do a whole lot of reading of the scriptures to him. He wasn't able to read it for himself, so he'd have to take people's word on whatever he was told. He's fending for himself. And so they bring in the parents. And, I'll give them to this regard, the parents didn't condemn him. Well, let's just say that, okay? They didn't say, yeah, he's a blasphemer, stone him. Thank heavens for little favors. But they certainly didn't defend their son. And they said, well, you ask him how it happened. We're not going to answer because they were afraid. So we can see that this is why they probably, and and when you're reading into this and you know why did they bring the parents into it, why did they say he is of age, ask him. It's because he's of age of accountability. He's an adult male, and even on our recent history, George Washington was a surveyor for the British military when he was like 16. Surveyor. He was out leading the British forces and like staking out land and mapping it, creating maps of this new land at age 16. You know, and if you've never done any land nav, if you've never gone out into a wilderness, if you've not gone to any large state parks and just sit down and look around and go, okay, let me try to find this on a map. They didn't even have maps. So he had to create the map. And he had to make sure that it jived with all the other maps being made. And he did that at age 16. Pretty impressive. Now you think about most 16-year-olds can't give correct change. If they work at a fast food place and someone gives them cash and they put in the wrong amount, and then they're like, oh, I don't know how to make change. And it's just like, you know, so if you give somebody a few extra coins so you don't have to get change back, they look at you, I don't know what to do with this. And we'll round it up. They're like, what? So again, this young man would have been expected at age 12 to already know the family business. By this time, he had been instructed and trained, and if his dad was a blacksmith at age 12, he could literally go out and be a blacksmith. If he was a farmer, he could go out and work the land and till it and be completely independent. But when we can look at this as a 12-year-old and we see a 12-year-old standing there in the midst of all of these wealthy Pharisees that he's never laid eyes on before. He's never seen them. He might have heard their voices, but he had never seen them. And now these men are cowering over him. He's impoverished. Okay? And they're bullying him. They're bullying him into denying the man that gave him his sight. And again, what we talked about in the last lesson is this is analogous of not only does he have his vision for the first time and he sees the light, literally, but he now sees the light spiritually. And the Pharisees are trying to get him to close his eyes to the spiritual light. Like, be thankful for the physical light, but close your eyes to the spiritual light. And this man who had been born blind for his entire life, not born in sins, but of course had sinned, now that his eyes had truly been opened, these people were trying to get him to shut them. And he refused because he knew what it was like to be blind. And he never wanted to be blind again. Anyways, so we keep going. Verses 24 through 34. Okay, they tried to now bully the parents and get the parents to deny that this was their son. And that could have this kid, if the parents would have been like, that's not our son. We denounce him. We don't know who he is. That's not our son. Then that could have ended right there. But, but at least they're like, that's our son. And yes, he was born blind. They at least acknowledged that, but they wanted to acknowledge how it happened. Verse 24. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. But again, think about that he can't give God the glory if he denies the Son. If he denies God, he cannot give God the glory. Okay, we know that this man is a sinner. And he answered and said to him, again, think about how many 12-year-olds will do this kind of pushback. And I'm talking about a tantrum. And a tantrum against people that they know will not harm them. These individuals could literally stone the man to death. These individuals could rend their clothing and then just tear him to pieces. Okay? This is not his parents that love him and put up with tantrums. This kid is not having a tantrum. He is pushing back. And he said, he answered them and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, though, that though I was blind, now I see. And then they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Again, giving him another out. And he answered them and said, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? And that stung him, right? Then they reviled him and said, you are his disciples, are a disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. And again, compare and contrast. Eyes are open spiritually. Yes, he's a disciple of Christ. And what is he losing? He's losing his parents. He's losing his community. He's losing his livelihood because he doesn't have any skills. He's blind. What is he going to do? Well, a whip will only get you so far. He had to have trust in God. He had to have trust in Jesus Christ that he was going to stand in the light regardless of whatever that was going to bring. And then verse 29 says, we know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he's from. Now, again, they say, give God the glory he is. Think about that. They're saying, give God the glory. Just like when they told Jesus they told the Pilate when Jesus was on the cross, let his blood be upon us and our children's children. Because they thought he was guilty. And so guilty blood on them wasn't a big deal, right? Innocent blood would be a big deal. But what they were asking for is what literally had to happen for them to be cleansed. Because they had to put the blood of the lamb on them to be cleansed. And so it's like they don't even know what they're asking for, but they're asking for the right thing. And this is the same thing. Give God the glory. Okay, Jesus Christ, healed me. He's giving God the glory. He's giving them exactly what they asked. Now they say, we know that God spoke to Moses. For this fellow, we do not know where he's from. How did they know that God spoke to Moses? How did they know that Moses even existed? Is the original temple still there? Is the implements that were in the Ark of the Covenant still there? Is the Ark of the Covenant still there? What is still there? And even if it was, is that still evidence? Had they known Moses? Did they see Moses? Even the people that were there alive during Moses' day, were they with Moses when God spoke to Moses? How did they know those in Moses' day? How did they know that God spoke to Moses? Well, those in the day, here they have history. But those in the day, they only knew that God spoke to Moses because of what Moses could do. The things that Moses did in freeing the Jews from Egypt, the miracles that he did, and the things that he said that came true, they were like, nah, I wasn't a witness, but I believe it. And what less is Jesus doing? He's not doing anything less than what Moses did. He's doing greater than what Moses did. Moses never healed anybody of being blind. Moses never brought anybody back from the dead. Moses didn't walk on water. So Jesus Christ is doing more than Moses. But again, these individuals weren't there. Even the individuals who were there did not see God speaking to Moses, did not hear God speaking to Moses. They got it secondhand from Moses. And yet they're sure, because what Mike said here, these people are having to go by history. They're having to go by the written word. They're having to go by tradition and what's being told back from the father to the parent to the so on and so forth. Yeah, they were willing to believe that, but they were not willing to believe what was in front of their own eyes.
But they actually, I don't know that they didn't believe that it was happening. That I truly believe that they knew. They chose not to acknowledge it for personal gain.
Some people.
And this child never said up to this point that this is Jesus the Christ. He never said that. He never said that this is the man that we're looking for up to this point.
Well, I don't even know if he knew.
That's what I'm saying. He just knew that this person fixed his sight, healed him. And that's what he keeps telling them. Look, I don't know, nor do I care. All I know is that I see. I keep telling you, you're not listening to what I'm saying. Are you stupid? That, I mean, really.
It would have been awesome if he said it like
Yeah,
that.
I know, but it's kind of what he said. He
But
kind of said it just in a different way.
but yeah, but the thing is, right? So we know that there are some that believed when Jesus was teaching and preaching, that some believed, but they feared the Jews. We know that even after his resurrection, there were some that believed, but because what they feared, they did. But then there are others that don't. So we know that there are believers that do not obey, and again, you read James chapter 2, belief without works is nothing. And we see it in Christ's lifetime that there are people that believe that do not obey, and it's nothing. It doesn't benefit them anything. And so what they're trying to do is get this young man to be like them.
Well, if he's like that, then that solidifies their case.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. It's like, okay, you keep saying, I'm not even saying he's the Christ. I'm just saying this happened. And they're asking him to close his eyes to what happened, to deny it, to explain it away, or anything else. They're trying to get him to be like them and be blind, spiritually blind. And they want him, I'm gonna ignore this. I'm gonna look away, right? And again, they are saying that they know things that they did not see. They did not see Moses. They know it for a surety, but they're also saying they know for a surety that Jesus Christ is not the one. This is like, these are the same people that during the days of the prophets would have called for the prophet's death. During the day of Moses, they would have rebelled against Moses. These are the same people. And so when people today are like, well, if Jesus came in this day and age, things would be different. No, because you're always going to have people that are going to reject God. You're always going to have people that are going to reject God's messengers. That doesn't change. But anyways, I think it's funny. It's like, we know, that word know, a certainty. There is no certainty. They can say, we believe. We believe. We have faith in the scriptures that this happened. But no, they know it. And yet, they're saying they do not know where Jesus is from. Yet the acts that Jesus is doing, healing a man that was born blind. You read the scriptures, when it's foretelling the coming of the Christ, the lame will walk and the blind will see and the deaf will hear. They know that's what the scripture says. They know this is the coming of the Christ. Yet they're closing their eyes and they're rejecting what their vision sees, they're rejecting. And they're like, no. It's like the Mythbusters. I reject your reality and I substitute my own. That's what they used to say. And so the same thing, they're rejecting reality and they're substituting it. The man answered and said to them, why, this is a marvelous thing. Again, that's the scriptures. This is a marvelous thing that these were told these things were going to happen. That you do not know where he is from. Yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God, does his will, he hears him. Now again, this is a marvelous thing. Think about it. I told you about this too. There were people that would believe. Okay? Both sides of their mouth. They're saying, one, we know where this man is from, and the Christ we won't know, right? Now they're saying, we don't know where he's from. Well, which one is it? You say you know where he's from, so he can't be the Christ. And now you're saying you don't know where he's from, and he can't be the Christ. This is just a few chapters from each other. He can't be the Christ because we know his lineage. And we know where he's from. And now he can't be the Christ because we don't know. Pick one. Pick one and stick with it. And he's saying, this is a marvelous thing. He's saying, if you don't know where he's from, this is a marvelous thing. This is the Christ. Because you don't know where he's from, so he must be from God. This is miraculous. You had something to say. Yeah.
Yes, I do. But I was going to
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's still this child talking. And you were commenting just a little while there that he wasn't educated. If he hadn't been read, no one read in the scriptures that he would not have known. Even the scripture, because he couldn't read it because it was braille time. But he obviously listened.
He listens.
He obviously heard. I mean, and if he were in the synagogue, he would have heard it.
Yeah.
Jesus preached in the synagogue.
Yeah.
So he listened and he remembered, he knew, and he's like, oh, hold on.
Yeah.
You're saying you don't know where this person's from, and this person and the next person. The blind can now see. And then he's like, and if you weren't from God, it wouldn't have happened. Because God doesn't listen to people who aren't followers of him.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, this child's been listening. Well, now what do we do? Okay, be gone. So he listens. He is not ignorant
Yeah.
to the scripture. He knew the scripture.
Yeah. He made up for his other loss of one sense for made up for the
Because
others.
I'm a
Listen.
blind person here. Are y'all the deaf people?
Yeah. In verse 32, since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Reject that. Reject that. And so it says, they answered to him and said, you were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us? And they cast him out. You're right. They're like, we're done with you. You didn't reject Christ, so we're done with you. And that's we're gonna go home.
Yeah, and then they're just stupid, go away.
Yeah.
And they're just like, it's so childish. It's just insane.
Maybe I did. Scroll down my notes here. So let's read what he's talking about here when he talks about the blind having their eyes open. Isaiah chapter 35, verses 3 through 6. This is just one of many. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are fearful-hearted, be strong, do not fear. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. And I think this young man, when I think of this why I brought this particular one up. Be strong and do not fear. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Again, I imagine him hearing this, maybe read in the synagogue or something along this line. Verse 5, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, for the tongue of the dumb sing. The water shall burst forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. And Jesus, he says, if you drink of me, you will never get thirst. And where did he burst forth on the scene from? He came out of the desert. He went to go fast for 40 days and 40 nights before he began his ministry, before he began preaching the gospel, and streams in the desert. So he comes bursting forth from the scene. But I can imagine this kid saying, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. God healed you. God gave you your sight. God will protect you. Do not deny God. Do not deny God. Whatever you do, do not deny God. And he doesn't. He does not deny God. He's not yet affirming, but Jesus hasn't come back to him. This is where we come in here. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, he had cast out of the synagogue. Lost his family, lost his access, lost his religion. Okay? like the REM song, losing his religion. He lost it. It's gone. It's taken from him. You're an outcast. Okay? Jesus heard that they had cast him out. When he had found him, he said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? And he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you. Then he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Right here, right, it says, verse 31, now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. What is he doing? He is worshiping God. For again, I hit this back time and time again, because I want you to get this through. Jesus is God. And there are a lot of people, and I'm going to be preaching a sermon not too long from now, not today, but about truth. And one of the things they try to do is get you to accept the little truth, but believe the big lie. And you have a lot of people out there in the religious world that will say Jesus existed. Listen to Ben Shapiro on one of his podcasts or whatever else like that, the conservative guy from the Daily Wire. He's a Jew. He will tell you Jesus existed, but he was a rebel. And he tried to rebel, and he was squashed, and he was killed. And no, he wasn't resurrected. So he will believe that Jesus Christ existed, which is the little truth. But he denies that Jesus is God, that he was the Messiah, that he's the Christ, the anointed one. So he wants you to believe the big lie. Well, in here, he believes both that Jesus is before him as a man, but he also believes that he is God because he worships him. And Jesus didn't rebuke him, didn't say, hey, whoa, hey, I'm just a prophet, just like you. Don't worship me. No, he doesn't rebuke him. He accepts it. So, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. And in verse 39, and Jesus said, for judgment I have not come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind. Now, he doesn't made blind. Did Jesus literally, physically, or spiritually make the Pharisees be blind? Or did they choose to be blind? They chose to be. They chose to blind themselves. You remember in the scriptures it says if your eye offends you, pluck it out, because it's better to go in the world blind, okay, than see, go into hellfire. These people, instead of going into heaven, instead of going into righteousness, would rather pluck their eyes out and be blind. They're the exact opposite. Go ahead, Mike.
The Pharisees, they were the power that was at that time, and they saw Jesus as a threat to their power hold on the people. So therefore, that is why they belittled him and tried to make like he was not the Son of God.
Absolutely. Verse 40, and some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, are we blind also? But Jesus said to them, if you were blind, if you were not been given the choice, right? If you hadn't seen it with your own eyes, you would have no sin. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains. In Revelation chapter 22, verses 6 through 9, this is the end of the scriptures. This is the last thing we hear on the way out. In Revelation chapter 22, verses 6 through 9, then he said to me, these words are faithful and true. And the Lord God of the holy prophets sent his angel to show his servants the things which must shortly take place. Behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is he who keeps the words of the prophecy he spoke. Now I, John, saw and heard these things, and when I heard and saw, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel who showed me these things. He was terrified. This angel looked pretty impressive, and he was terrified. Then, verse 9, then he said to me, see that you do not do that, for I am your fellow servant and of your brethren the prophets, and of those who keep the words of this book, worship God. So we see you don't worship anything else. The angel that came to John, that brought him this revelation, this specific one right here, even though he was pretty impressive, nope, not God. But Jesus, yeah, you fall down and you worship him because he is God. Questions, comments, thoughts?
You mean we don't even worship the Pope?
No. No. No, you don't bow down to anybody, you don't kiss anybody's ring. Yeah. And the thing is about worship, it comes intuitively. It comes without needing any training. Every society, every people that has ever existed, if you're an anthropologist and you research this, every society has worshiped. There has never been a group of people that did not worship. We are built to worship. It only depends on what we worship. I mean, think about it. Even secular atheistic societies, what do they worship? Well, they worship government. They worship science. They worship themselves. They worship fame. They worship money. The word fan is short for fanatic. And when you see people that get painted up on Sunday, and they get dressed and they do their rituals and they eat their certain things or they wear their certain socks and they do the ritualisticness of it. They got to sing the song in the quarter, that they're supposed to because it's good luck. And all of these things they do, the good luck thing, right? It's like the Jews of the Old Testament. Yeah, we worship God, but we worship all these other gods too because we're making sure we're covering our bases. All of the idol worship, the praying to saint this and saint that, and praying to this, that, all of this, praying to Mary, is worship. Who do we pray to? The Father. Who do we pray through? The Son. And how do we know how to pray?
He gave us an example.
He gave us the Word. So we only know how to pray because we have the Word. So we can pray because we have the Word. And we only have the right to go to the Father because the Son has given us that. And our prayers are directed to the Father. And so anyway, it's just, but yes, this idea of worshiping anything else but God is unbiblical. You cannot. And yet for people that repeatedly say that Jesus never claimed to be God, here's your sign. Was it the Bill Maher guy? Here's your sign. Comedian. Bill Engvall, yeah. Here's your sign. Jesus accepted worship. If he was not God, then he made himself a false idol. You shall have no other gods. He broke that commandment. Jesus is a sinner. Don't hear him. If he accepts this worship and he is God, no sin. If he accepts this worship and he's not God, he's a sinner, he's a man, don't hear him. So you have to choose. What do you want to believe? And I believe that Jesus is God. Questions, comments, thoughts before we go on to the next? Go ahead.
Worship is connected to power. Whatever you get your power from, that's who you worship. And whether it be government, whether it be false gods, or whether it be the God. Wherever you get your power from, that is worship.
Yeah, and let's be, the English language is complex because it's always evolving. And it's like trying to speak to a teenager or a Generation Z person, a Zoomer, or whatever. It's complex because they use words like cat. And you're like, excuse me, what does that mean? It means false. And I'm like, how does cat mean false? Or I think there's a word called totes, which means something's good, I think. I don't even know. really, I don't, totes, yes, totally. So you've got all these little things, right? Well, so we have things like I love, and we'll say, I love chocolate, you know, and it's, do we mean love? Well, in the English vernacular, we certainly can, because we have to read in what love is. Okay? But if we're going to be Christians and we're going to speak biblical things, we need to make sure that we clarify biblical things. So it's like this idea of worship. I worship the ground that she walks on. Well, are you really worshiping the ground that she walks on, or do you just love your wife? Do you adore her? Are you offering sacrifices to her? And I'm going to tell you, we do. We offer things to our spouses. We offer things to our kids. But is it worship? Or do we love them? And are we sacrifice? We sacrifice one for another. But it's not worship. Here, this is worship. He fell down. And there are certain things that come into worship. When I adore my wife, and when I'm lifting her up, I'm simply doing what I'm supposed to do biblically, like Christ does with the church. But does he worship the church? No, the church worships him. And so we have to understand that this right here is not saying that he just thought he's just hung over the moon with Jesus, or he's moved and intrigued by him, or he's adoring Jesus. He worshiped Jesus. This is Koine Greek. This is biblical. This is biblical worship. And if you go back in the context, that anyone, we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. And what does he do? He hears Jesus, he worships Jesus, and he obeys Jesus, and he obeys him. And really quickly, I think we can hit this just real quick. We're going to come into John chapter 10, into the I am statements. And we're going to have here the I am the good shepherd that we're going to see in John chapter 10, verse 11. And I'll go ahead and read this in verse 1 through 6. Most assuredly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same as a thief and a robber. But he who does not enter the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by the name and leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them. Then the sheep follow him, for they know his voice, and yet they will by no means follow a stranger. But we will flee, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. So homework, okay? First century, what do we know about shepherds? And what do we know about sheep? And I'm going to tell you what, it's pretty applicable to today too. What do we know about sheep today? They haven't changed. And what is a shepherd? What does a shepherd do? And application, what in the illustration, the sheepfold by the door, okay? And the shepherd and the door is specifically interesting. Research that and what he's talking about here, because in John chapter 10, I am the door and I am the shepherd. Is he saying these two different things? Is he saying these the same thing? What is he saying here? What is the illustration? What are we saying? So that's what we have for homework in John chapter 10. Again, thank you for your attention, your comments, and dealing with my voice.